مرحبا بكم في حوارات السياق. قال مسؤولون إيرانيون إن طهران وعدت روسيا بتزويدها بصواريخ أرض بالإضافة إلى المزيد من الطائرات المسيرة في خطوة أثارت غضب الولايات المتحدة والقوى الغربية الأخرى التي تدعم أوكرانيا في الحرب. عموما للمزيد من المتابعة ينضم إلينا ريتشارد وايتز مدير مركز التحليل السياسي والعسكري في معهد هدسون. أستاذ ريتشارد، مرحبا بك معنا.
Thank you for hosting me.
ما الذي يعنيه دخول الطائرات المسيرة الإيرانية على خط المواجهة في الحرب الأوكرانية؟
Well, this has multiple significances. So first, it shows that losing the conventional battles and territory recently to Ukraine, the Russian government has decided to escalate the conflict. We've seen this in threats to attack from the north and threats about having nuclear weapons or so-called dirty bombs, these radiological dispersive devices interfere in the battlefield, and the attacks on the Ukrainian cities with these drones. So this is an escalation of the fighting. It's something that the Ukrainians find challenging to deal with, just as the drones were difficult for the US forces in Syria and Iraq, and the Saudi and UAE Arab refineries, and the the Yemeni government forces. All of these have found it difficult to deal with these Iranian drones because they're small, they fly low, they fly irregularly, and there's so many numbers of them. And then broadly and diplomatically, it's a worrisome sign of a closer partnership between Russia and Iran, even in violation of US Security Council prohibitions against such arms sales.
لماذا باعتقادك لجأت موسكو للطائرات المسيرة الإيرانية وإلى ماذا يؤشر ذلك؟
Yes, the Russian government attack in Ukraine has been flawed. It's lasted much longer than the Russians anticipated. And so they've running low on long-range strike systems. They have, of course, ballistic missiles, and they've been using these, including so-called hypersonic missiles. They've also been using many cruise missiles, and then warplanes, but they're running out of the cruise and ballistic missiles. Their warplanes are afraid to enter Ukrainian airspace because they're going to be possibly shot down by improving Ukrainian air defenses. So now the Russians are turning to these drones. And so that's why Russia wants them, the demand side. And then the supply side is, unfortunately, Iran managed to capture a US drone a few years ago that mistakenly landed on Iran, pretty much intact. And so they've been able to reverse engineer and study the technology, and and also apply their own, and we've seen Turkey do this as well. So you have these new military powers, Turkey, Iran, and others, coming in and providing these simple but effective weapons. So this is why we're seeing this. But again, we were all surprised as well that Iran would provide so many drones and Russia was so eager to acquire them.
هل تمثل الدرونز الإيرانية تهديداً فعلياً في الحرب الحالية؟
No, you are correct that the payload these drones that Iran carries is small. It can, if effectively, it's sometimes they're used against troops. The Ukrainians actually have their own drones, and they've been using them to attack Russian officers, Russian artillery, Russian commanders behind the front line, so beyond the reach of their own artillery. But what Russia is doing, it's using it as a terror weapon. So they're not affecting the military battle. What they're trying to do is destroy Ukraine's fuel, energy infrastructure, its power grids, its transformers, disrupt its internal function, and basically make life so miserable for the Ukrainians that many will flee. And we've seen this strategy actually in Syria. As you recall, they try and starve out the cities, bomb the cities, and so that the civilian population leaves, and then what's left are the fighters, which then they can drop chemical weapons and do other things too.
بريطانيا وصفت الجهود الأوكرانية لاحتواء الطائرات المسيرة بأنها ناجحة. ماذا فعلت كييف لتحييد خطر تلك المسيرات؟
So the Ukrainian defenses against missiles and air attacks has been growing stronger. As you recall, in the beginning of the war, they were pleading for NATO to come in and provide a no-fly zone and protect them from the Russian planes. That didn't occur, but NATO has been providing the Ukrainians with much more enhanced air defense systems. So now Russian warplanes don't dare fly over Ukrainian territory because they'll be shot down. And many of the cruise and ballistic missiles that have been launched, perhaps half of them have either been shot down or missed their target because of defects. So it appears that this is the case with the drones, that the Ukrainians are shooting down more than half of them. The problem is there are just so many and they're so cheap. And according to the Ukrainians, the Russians have ordered several thousand of these. So even if they can shoot, say, 3 out of 4, that's still 500 drones that get through to attack their power stations and so on. So I wouldn't call it effective, but again, it's been a challenge for everybody. The U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria are constantly under attack by these drones. We saw Iran launch a major attack on Saudi Arabia and UAE, in particular, the oil refineries there. And these are just vulnerable targets. They're large, they're not heavily protected, and the drones just only one of them or a couple just needs to get through.
بالموازاة، الأمين العام لحلف شمال الأطلسي قال إن التحالف سيرسل دفاعات مضادة للطائرات المسيرة لأوكرانيا في الأيام القليلة المقبلة. هل هي قادرة على إحداث فرق على الأرض؟
It'll reduce the number to get through. The way to defeat drones are to shoot them down, or to attack from wherever they're being launched from, destroy the launching, or to try and intercept the communication between the drone and the operator, or disrupt the navigation, or to camouflage so the drone attacks what it thinks is a target, but it's actually not a target. So there are many means. But the problem is, again, just there's so many. So even if they're able to prevent a large number from getting through, some will.
الأمم المتحدة تعهدت بالتحقيق في استخدام روسيا لطائرات الإيرانية المسيرة. ماذا سيحدث حال إثبات ذلك؟
Probably not much, because the UN Security Council includes Russia, so Russia is going to veto any resolution to try and impose sanctions on itself. And we've seen the Russians already threaten, saying, well, the UN it's beyond its authority to do this. If it does something like this, we'll take action against the UN for its unauthorized activities, cut its budget, and so on. So although the UN is helpful for raising this issue and bringing attention to it, it's really got to be something done by the NATO countries to help Ukraine. And perhaps other countries to urge the Russians to cease these supplies.
وخارج إطار الأمم المتحدة، هل ستفرض مثلا الدول الغربية عقوبات على إيران؟
Well, they can. I mean, Russia and Iran, though, thousands of sanctions on them already. They're the two most sanctioned countries in the world. So I think more effective than any sanctions is going to be a better system to defeat the drones, which will also provide good protection for the Arabian Gulf countries and the U.S. forces in the Middle East and so on. The Iranian drones, the Iranian missiles and so on are a big problem, and we need to figure out, nuclear deal or not, how to deal with them.
وزير الخارجية الإيراني قال إن واشنطن أرسلت رسائل للإسراع بإنجاز الاتفاق النووي. هل موضوع الطائرات المسيرة تم تجاوزه وهضمه أمريكياً؟
Well, the Biden administration has taken the position that the most important question with regard to Iran is to reach the nuclear deal. So you need to focus on that. And anything else Iran does, they'll counter, but not to link it to the nuclear deal. So, Iran has tried to assassinate some of my colleagues and other people in the U.S. And so the Biden administration is trying to deal with that directly, not tied to the nuclear deal. We've seen the Iranian government suppress protesters at home. They're going to try and deal with that. And the same with these drones and the missiles and the support for the terrorists in Yemen and support for Hezbollah in Lebanon and so on. All these are being kept separate from the nuclear negotiations. And that's a difference from the previous Trump administration that demanded that Iran comprehensively change its behavior.
فقط لأفهم هنا، هل تضغط الولايات المتحدة على إيران بملفات مثل الدرونز والانتقادات لتعامل النظام الوحشي مع المتظاهرين لتحقق شيئا على طاولة المفاوضات؟
The Iranians say that. They say that the protests are organized by the CIA to put pressure on them for the deal. I do not. It could actually have the opposite effect because the Iranian government will double down and consider itself besieged and try and say it needs nuclear weapons to survive. I think these are all occurring separately, and the Biden administration wants to keep it that way. So I don't think they're trying to leverage these other issues on the nuclear negotiations. I think they want to get a nuclear deal so that they can then go back and deal more sternly with these other problems Iran's presenting. And the Iranians government probably understands that and therefore is delaying the nuclear deal to keep the U.S. from taking a harder line on these other issues.
كيف يمكن فهم التناقض هنا؟
And this is not unknown. The U.S. has nuclear negotiations with Russia and the Soviet Union, despite all their differences. So sometimes some questions are just considered so important that you're not going to try and link it to the other issues. Where someone like Henry Kissinger, he's a master of this, would always try and link everything so that you could take something that the other side wanted and use that as leverage to get what you want. But that takes a lot of skill, and we just haven't seen that with the current US government.
ريتشارد وايتز، شكرا للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق.
شكرا.
مشاهدينا، شكرا على طيب المتابعة. إلى الملتقى.